So last year, I spent some time interviewing a lot of developers who had just started building with AI, and specifically started playing around with using large language models. And from those conversations, there was like a few different themes that came up.
And you're in the picture.
More there?
It's around here that you need to be.
We can be right next to each other. And yeah, there was kind of a few different themes that came up. Like one of them for some developers was sometimes they'd find a really cool open source project on GitHub, but then the first thing that would come up as soon as they tried to start using it was they'd have to enter their OpenAI API key. That was really annoying, especially if they don't want to spend money and they wanted to keep their data private. Another thing that came up, the second one you see there, and this one was probably the one that came up the most, is just this feeling and sense of overwhelm. I think Stephen touched upon it as well earlier in the space, and just how many different tools, how many different frameworks, how many different models you have to navigate when you're starting out. And not only is the difficulty come from having to pick the right things, but then even if you pick certain tools, certain frameworks, certain models, there are a lot of interoperability issues. And sometimes some of these projects are quite new, and a new release comes out, and it breaks everything. And that was causing a lot of headaches for developers just starting out. And then the third one that came up a little bit as well is just like this feeling of pressure and this need to kind of be able to experiment and prototype quickly. I think a lot of that comes down to this space being and like moving very quickly. So what a lot of developers kind of wanted was to feel like they could easily experiment and swap out data, swap out models, swap out tools nice and easily. So with Blueprints, we wanted to start like trying to address some of these pain points that were coming up for developers, and really try and make sure that using open source tools and open source models is the default for developers. So what are blueprints? So blueprints are essentially customizable workflows that allow developers to prototype AI applications using open source models and tools. When we're building blueprints, there's kind of generally 5 principles that we're trying to stick to. The first one is that we only use open source models and tools, and obviously the code itself is open source. Secondly, we're trying to make them really customizable so that you can adapt the blueprint to your own needs with your own data for your own use case. Thirdly, we're trying to make them extensible. So we see the blueprint basically as the foundation code that you can build on top of and extend further for your needs. Fourthly, we kind of want to build up a collection of different blueprints that show you how to do things differently. And as part of that, we want to have some standardization across the different blueprints. So we're trying to build them in a consistent way, and we think that'll make them easier to leverage for people, especially people starting out in AI and starting to use LLMs. And then finally, and I think this is the most important one, we want this to be community-driven. So we've started building our own blueprints that we've put out there, but really we want the community to also contribute and build some as well so that we can build up this collection of blueprints to really show people how you can start with open source models and open source tools. So, a QR code, maybe not as many as Stephen, coming up. There it is. So to kind of like kickstart this project, we've released something recently in a beta, this website called the Blueprints Hub. So please feel free to scan this QR code, it'll take you to the hub. Basically, this is going to be our website for collecting all the different blueprints and kind of showcasing them in a user-friendly way so people can kind of get started using them and testing them nice and easily. For now, this is a beta, so we've only got a couple so far, but over the next kind of month or two, we'll be adding a lot more and hopefully starting to showcase some of the community's blueprints as well. So now I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to talk us through the first couple of blueprints we made.
Hello. So, the first one that we built is called Document to Podcast, and as the name states, it converts a document into a podcast. The idea is basically that pretty much every one of you have probably heard about Notebook LLM by Google, and it has a podcast feature. So the question was, can we actually replicate this with open source tools? We did some research, find some implementations that didn't fulfill the details that the bullet points that we said before. Either they require an API call to some model or wherever, so we give it a try. I don't have a QR code. I trust in your ability to type. Yeah, so it's that Document to Podcast.
Takes a second. Try it again.
I guess image loading not super optimized here. So here is just a screenshot of the GitHub README. So if you go there, you are going to see the same. It's basically to state that there are 4 options to run it. Depending on who you want to pay the hardware, you can choose to Google to pay the hardware, and you go to a Google Collaboratory and run the blueprint there. It's probably the easiest option and the one where you can customize, try to tweak the prompt, try a different number of speakers, try a different model, wherever you want. Then there is also Hugging Face Spaces if you want Hugging Face to pay, and then there is GitHub if you want Microsoft to pay. If you want to run it locally, there is a PyPy package that you can install and try directly. If not, you can clone the GitHub repository. And the next one is a work in progress, and it's called a structured QA, and this might not be as obvious title as the previous one. The idea was basically that I was working on the podcast. I like board games. It was Christmas. I was playing with my family, and they literally told me, "Why don't you do something useful that can answer questions about the board game rules?" Because we are having a little bit of a discussion about the rule of a game. So, structured QA, the idea is that many of the question answering approaches out there assume that the world is absolutely chaos. No one has a document well structured. Well, in my experience, for example, in board games, people actually think about structuring the document into sections, putting some reasonable section names so you can navigate them. And this is also true, I believe, for many technical documentation and other places. So we wanted to give it a try, whether what of the existing approaches work the best. Yeah. So the first thing we did, we collected a small benchmark. We ran different solutions. So Gemini is probably the largest, has the largest context window out there, and is the most easy to use for free. So as a benchmark of what you can achieve with open source, we ran the benchmark on Gemini. These are the results, and then in comparison, we ran it against Quen 2.57 billion. I actually was trying to run the benchmark against DeepSeek yesterday and over the weekend, but it keeps freaking out about trying to answer the question thinking instead of just reading the document, like reasoning so it didn't work. So yeah, this is a work in progress. We are trying to implement an alternative solution to the long context that is not feasible locally and to the RAG implementations. Here I choose Ragatouille because it's such a cool name that I have to use that. Yeah.
So I guess I'll just end by saying these are kind of the first couple that we've worked on. We're going to be working on some more, but we'd love to hear suggestions from you on what you think we should work on next. If you've seen something where maybe there's a good closed source solution or something that works well with a good closed source model, but if you want to see an open source alternative, please feel free to submit an idea here. Or if you think you can contribute to this project and build something yourself, please also scan this QR code and submit something. We'd love to work with you. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, do we have questions? And we don't. Cool. Do we have questions on the chat? Yes. No, and there's a question there. Let's do the room first. Je sais pas, je l'ai posé.
A quick question. Are you expecting the person who's submitting the question to be a developer? Oh, I can speak a lot louder if you want me to. So do you expect the person submitting the question to be a developer, or is this open to designers and
open to
anyone? Yeah?
Yeah, literally anyone. If you've got something you think would be cool to work on, we'd love to hear about it. And then we can chat about your idea, and you don't have to develop it. Maybe we can find someone else to.
Tim, do we have questions on the chat? No, we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, if you leave the room, do so with that door or that door.